G'day folks, Anthony here from Supernal magazine with another one of our interview series, and today joining me as per usual is ShirleySienna. How are you, Shirley?
Hi everyone, I'm well, thank you.
That's good. I'm getting my Shirley and my Shirley going there. So, and also in the next issue of the magazine, issue number 53, we're going to be looking at animal consciousness and how animals play a big role in our lives, in our everyday lives. And little story, the other day I ran into a friend of mine that had a foal, and she's absolutely gorgeous, and she was talking about the mother of that foal being used in Paralympics training, that sort of stuff. And then that led me to sort of ask a little bit more, and then we've got on to Julia Battams, who's our special guest today, who, apart from a whole lot of things, is involved with Equine Pathways Australia, and that's equinepathways.org.au, with an amazing story about the work she's been doing and helping people with disabilities to be able to get out and perform on just meeting horses to actually performing in the Olympics. So welcome, Julia, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's great. It's great. Look, I was fascinated by your story when we had a chat the other day, and the sort of work that you've been doing sort of leading up to when Equine Pathways started. So let's maybe kick off with a little bit of an introduction of who you are and how you got even into the horse world.
Yeah, no problem. I'm probably very similar to a lot of people who just started as horsey kids. I literally had my parents were not horsey. I had a next door neighbour who had a pony, and just got interested in riding, and I never got over it. I never got rid of the bug. So I just went through pony club as a normal, horsey kid. I did a degree at uni. I did a science degree, and then went off and did a teaching degree. Worked overseas for a few years in horses, and came back to Australia and worked out that I didn't actually want to be a teacher. I wanted to stay in the horse world. So my mum and dad were, although not horsey, they were really supportive, and we ended up buying a property out here in Narre North, sort of 50 k's southeast of Melbourne. And I took over running that property in 1989 and turned it into an equestrian centre, and it's still that to this day. So we're called Balmoral Equestrian Centre, and that's where the Equine Pathways program started. So my background with riding, I've ridden through to Grand Prix myself, so I've competed and trained several horses at that level, and I did a lot of coaching of able-bodied athletes. And then in about 2005, 2006, I started coaching a lady called Anne Skinner. And Anne had been very seriously injured in an accident, actually attaching her car to her horse float. And it was an automatic car. She'd accidentally left it in reverse. Sorry, that's my dog barking. Billy, be quiet. And when she released the pressure of the tow bar against the tow ball, the car reversed over her. So she was trapped underneath the car with horrendous injuries. But she survived, and she's had all sorts of surgeries and so on. And back in 2005, when I met her, she had already been a para-equestrian athlete for quite some time, having competed at Athens and Atlanta Paralympic Games. Mm-hmm. And she came into my group of clients as an athlete. And I'd never had any experience at all with coaching para before, but we ended up I went with her to the World Championships in 2006, and it was there. I was being a bit sneaky, actually. I had gone into the indoor riding arena, competition arena, ready to watch the able-bodied Grand Prix class, which I was quite excited about, being at that level. I thought this is going to be a really good class. The para stuff was happening prior to that in the same arena. And when I went in, I was a little bit early for the Grand Prix, and it was the last of the excuse me, the last of the para athletes was just starting his competition, and it was a Czech rider, and he was grade 1, so he had very severe cerebral palsy, so all 4 limbs affected, had a very rolling movement with his head and neck, and the grade 1 athletes, I found out subsequently, walk-only athletes. So the grades, I'll explain a little bit about this later, but for this particular athlete, his entire test was in walk. And I probably quietly rolled my eyes and went, oh, that's right, I'll sit through this and wait for the Grand Prix to start. Well, it totally changed my perception of what parasport is about. Excuse me again, because this little horse that he was on just did every single movement in that test in perfect harmony, in this beautiful round outline, in like they were making 8-meter circles, 10-meter circles, stretching the walk, shortening the walk, in this beautiful rhythm, with this athlete showing really severe spastic movements, and his body was completely under, not really under his own control. And yet this little horse did the most magnificent test. And I sat there crying, because I'm a bit of a crier, and I was hooked. It was just fabulous. So I then watched all of the rest of the tests for the para athletes, came back to Australia and got quite involved with a few other para athletes here. And then in 2009, I was offered, our international body, which is the FEI, Federation Equestrian Internationale, made an agreement with all of the national sporting organisations that instead of riding for the disabled, running the Paralympic sport in equestrian, the equestrian organisations themselves had to take that on. So our federation was Equestrian Australia, suddenly was tasked with running para-equestrian sport. And not many people had much idea what that involved. So I was employed at that point in 2009 as the head coach for para-equestrian, having had the vast experience of coaching one athlete. So I took it on, and I didn't make too many mistakes in the first year. Well, that's not true. I made lots of mistakes in the first year, but I think I was pretty open about the fact that I didn't really know that much about what I was doing. Took a team to the World Championships in 2010, and from there sort of started to get a bit of a grasp around what para actually is and what it can do for people. So I was lucky enough to do the World Champs in 2010, then took a team to London Paralympic Games in 2012, where one of our athletes, Joanne Formosa, won a gold medal in her class. So that was hugely exciting. And then again, the World Championships in 2014, and then Rio Paralympic Games in 2016. So I've had a really thrown in the deep end and really enjoyed those major international competitions and running the teams and squads for those. And then after 2016, the para program for Equestrian Australia stopped, and I still had a group of athletes who wanted to continue training, and they didn't have an avenue to do that. So I started off just inviting them around to my house on the weekend, and we just did some training here, and it grew and grew and grew to the point where I had to start. It had to be supported financially in a different way rather than just my business supporting it. So I then at that point set up a charity called Equine Pathways Australia, and we now have a board of directors who are absolutely fantastic, so supportive of what we do. We expanded, we managed to get through COVID. Prior to COVID, we'd only been in Victoria, just because it's where I live, so that's where the program was. And then during COVID, we reached out. We started running Zoom sessions, like I think like everybody did, and we actually attracted quite a big audience around the country. So after COVID, we branched out and we now run our program in every state. So we run 11 clinics in Victoria and 6 clinics in every other state every year. So the clinics involve a group of allied health providers. So we have a sports psychologist, a physio, an exercise physiologist, a dietitian, occupational therapist, a recreation therapist, plus our coaches, our dressage specialist coaches. So the athletes will come in, they're there for 2 days. They come in, they have a schedule of appointments, and they see all of those allied health practitioners in one venue, and they have their planning book, their goal setting book, if you like. And there are a range of athletes, from entry-level athletes to recreational through to those who have got that Paralympic ambition. And pretty much the whole 2-day program is designed around what their goal is. Their big, hairy, audacious goal is on the front cover of their diary. And then every month we help them to reset those smaller goals, monthly goals, so that they're meeting the big ones. So that was a very long sentence, but that's what we do.
Well, look, you've covered it beautifully, which you said you would be able to do. The interesting thing about all of that is, so you're talking about anyone that is not, say, able-bodied that can join in,
yep,
and be involved, and all they have to do really is have a love of horses and want to do
Correct.
something. That's essentially what I'm hearing.
Yep. So we have athletes with physical impairment. So if you like, there's 4 pinnacles of sport in equestrian. There's the Olympics for able-bodied athletes, Paralympics for athletes with a physical or visual impairment, Specialo, which is intellectual impairment, and Specialo is very much a community organisation. So it's very much about integration, and everyone enjoys their fun. It's their time. It's more participation than high performance sport. And then there's a reasonably new organisation called Virtus, which is now the international organising body for athletes with an intellectual impairment. So those are sort of the 4 avenues that you can participate in high performance sport. But certainly we have athletes who don't have any desire or ambition to be international performers, but rubbing shoulders with the likes of, dual Paralympian Anne Skinner and gold medalist Joanne Formosa. It's the community side and that sort of social engagement and interaction that is the real strength to the program, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just from what I've seen, absolutely. So we did touch on how each person responds to the horse and how the horses respond to the people, because we're talking about that consciousness. And I mean, if people understand horses are a mob, and they live in their group, their tribe, their herd.
Yep.
And very much that way. So yeah, so maybe explain a little bit about that for us too, because that's the really important thing, I feel.
Yeah, sure. They are absolutely herd animals. And if you watch horses working with each other, their body language is very, very clear, and it's very well understood by the other horses. So facial expressions, positioning their body, and so on. It's very, very clear that they're communicating. And with para sport, or with Paralympic athletes, or para athletes, I shouldn't say Paralympic athletes, but para athletes or athletes with any sort of disability, you'll have horses who have that empathy, and they really want to work out what the athlete is trying to do or say. And then you have other horses that are not that interested. It's exactly like people. Some people want to engage with other people and want to participate in that environment where they're having that communication, and other people just aren't that interested. So for us, selecting the horses to use in the program is really important, because we have to have horses who are empathetic, and they have that desire to do what the rider is trying to get them to do. Now, our horses in particular, and Riding for the Disabled is another organisation that does a very similar thing. Our horses will work with potentially 4 or 5 athletes over the 2 days, and they have to read the signals given by each of those 4 or 5 athletes, understand them, respond to them, and they're really intelligent. They're really intelligent. Pardon me. So there's a couple of horses who are just special, really special. One of them we literally just lost last week. At the age of 37, we had to have him euthanized, and he would have taught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to ride over his lifetime. And he was a very, very special horse. As a young horse, he was really naughty. As an able-bodied dressage horse, he was really naughty. In fact, he got sacked as a performance horse because his behaviour was so ordinary. But he just absolutely shone in that para space because he felt something. He felt a connection, and the athletes could connect with him. So on 2 separate occasions, I may cry when I tell this. I'll try not to, but I sometimes do.
Okay, you are human, like we all are.
Yep. So this particular, on 2 separate occasions, he has seen somebody. Yep, I'm going to cry. So there we go. He has seen somebody who needed to feel a little bit more cared for, and has made his his own way to that person. One situation was a young lady in a wheelchair, and she was with her physio. She'd come out of rehab hospital because her physio had brought her out because she'd said the day before to her parents, she was 15 and she was going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. She'd said to her parents the day before that she didn't want to continue. She was going to ask to end her life. And the physio picked her up, put her in a car and brought her here.
Wow.
So we've got this kid in the wheelchair, wheeled her down from the car park, put her in front of the indoor school, and Rocky was in there, and he walked out, and he put his head in this kid's lap, faced her like that, put his head in her lap, and she just hugged him. I hate it.
That's beautiful.
Hugged him around his head, and he just stood there. Now, horses don't like things not generally on their heads. They don't like hanging onto them, anything hanging onto them. This kid, he sat with his head in her lap. She hugged him for probably a minute, and you could see her. She just relaxed, and she just chilled out. And we actually put her on the horse that day, and led him round, and we made sure she was safe and all the rest. And she started coming to the EPA clinics, and she rode for probably 2 years with us, and then went off to uni and studied social work, and became I think she's working still now in rehab hospitals, just working with people who have been recently injured to let them know that there's an alternative. There is things they can do. Yeah. And that was him. That was Rocky. That was not us. That was 100% that horse saying, you're okay. And that's what they do.
Yeah, they do. They do. Shirley, you wanted to jump in?
I've had questions which you've answered as you've spoken beautifully. And I was going to ask, how do you choose the horse? Well, obviously the horse does the choosing of its own volition if it resonates, if it wants to do this, maybe as opposed to able-bodied, where they may not get as much choice about whether they're interested or not. So
yeah, look, I think when you select a horse, you get a fair idea as to whether they're going to suit the purpose or not. I mean, you can be wrong. You can pick a horse that you think is going to be suitable, and it turns out that it isn't. And you've just got to be very aware that you do read the horses and take note of what it is that they're saying. If they're not enjoying the work, or if they're not comfortable with the work, then you have to call it. And we've got a couple of horses that will tolerate some people and not others. And then some will just take on everyone. So, and then there's the opposite. You know, you'll have a horse who you think is going to be absolutely perfect, and you put an athlete with a disability on it, and that horse just says, no, I'm not doing it. So again, you read the horse's emotions and say, and behavior, and just take that on.
Which is so important. So where do the horses generally come from?
We have a few off the track horses, so we're really well supported by the thoroughbred industry, and we do take some of their off the track horses. Again, the off the trackers are good in a way because they've been exposed to big crowds, and they've had a lot of stuff go on around them, so they're used to being in and out of big barns and travel and all of that sort of stuff. So if they're retrained properly and they're that sort of empathetic horse, then we do have quite a few of those horses around the country. Others are horses who may have already had a career in sport and they're getting towards the end of their working life, and they're not able to do the level of work that they once did for their able-bodied riders. So we get donated horses like that. And yeah, that's most of it, really, that those two sort of categories.
So keeping them fed and watered and, tack and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
That in itself would be a fairly huge job.
Yeah, so that comes back to the individual centres that we use. So we hire a venue. So, for example, EPA hires Balmoral when we run the Victorian clinics. We hire Tall Timbers venue in New South Wales when we go up there. We've got a Rundle in Queensland. So each of those centres, when EPA hires the venue, then we hire their school horses as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that the responsibility of keeping and training those horses falls back onto the organisation that owns them.
Yep.
And we just step in and actually lease the whole facility, or rent, if you like, the whole facility, including the horses.
Right. Okay. Well, that would take a lot of pressure off you then to have to have horses and try and move them around and
yes,
and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So necessarily, I thought at first it was more like, I know there's horses for groups, but I thought there'd be more sort of one horse, one person connections.
Quite a lot of the athletes have their own horses and they'll bring them with them. So, for example, where were we on the weekend? We just had a 2-day clinic in Sydney, and we used, I think, 4 of the centre horses, and there would have been 5 or 6 athletes with their own horses in that. We had 14 or 15 riders there, I think. So yeah, it's sort of, 60-40 and own horses to centre horses.
Okay. Well, I guess if you're going to work at that level too, you've got to have your horse there on hand to be able to do the training, because it still comes back to how many hours you put in the saddle, doesn't it?
Yeah, correct. So again, most of the recreational athletes will be using the venue horses, and then those athletes who consider themselves on the Paralympic pathway, they'll be finding horses of their own.
Well, we know it's not a cheap exercise to own a horse. So yeah, it does cost a lot to keep them and maintain them in good, healthy condition too.
Is there subsidy, or is it up to the people to raise their own funding, or is there government input, or is it charities? How does it all work?
For the individual athlete, you mean?
Well, the whole, really, yeah.
So we're a charity. EPA is a charity, and we fund all of the clinics around the country. The athletes pay a minimal amount to attend, which we think is really important. And that's generally covered by because we do the sort of social engagement and community access side is a really important part of what we do, plus the allied health stuff. Most of them can claim that through their NDIS packages, but we only charge a small amount for them to attend. And then the charity supports the balance between what it actually costs and what the athletes put in. Then for the individual athletes, if they're looking to go on to do Paralympic selection and those sorts of things, that is all self-funded until they get on a squad. Once they're on a national squad, there's a small amount of funding that's organised or offered from Equestrian Australia, which is the national body, and that's given to the federation by the AIS and Paralympics Australia. So the government do put money in at that level.
So big and so complex, really, that it really does need a lot of support, and there's more just athletes, you know. It's not just athletes riding their horses and going through the trials and the games and everything like that. It's just on so many levels. Amazing. And
it's a big group of people when you I mean, for some of the low-level athletes, they'll have the athlete will have a groom. There might be an owner, the horse, because some of our athletes ride horses that belong to others. So they set a relationship up with a particular owner. So the owners might be there. Then they might have their personal carer there as well. They might have their parents too. They might have their personal coach. Then there's the management team. So like when as EPA, if we go and support a competition, if we've got a group of athletes competing, then we'll take a couple of coaches as well. Then there's generally the Equestrian Australia group as well. So I've actually got two hats. I'm also I went back into Equestrian Australia again last year, just prior to Paris. So I'm the technical lead again for Equestrian Australia, plus the program manager for EPA. So I sort of got two hats. I'm sort of balancing both at the moment.
Luckily, you've got broad shoulders to be able to.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But it's actually good because I can see what's needed in the pathway and I can see what's needed at high performance. So I can sort of start to make sure that those two things are aligned.
Yeah.
Do you find the competitors are very competitive?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because my experience with working with people, whether it's been, believe it or not, monks in India or people with, I don't like the term, not able-bodied, they can be really, really competitive. So that, you know, on all levels.
Don't tell me the monks are competitive.
Oh, absolutely.
Hilarious.
Back in 2010, I was doing a lot of work with older monks as part of the International Buddhist Dialects section of the Dalai Lama's temple. And the World Cup was on. And I was sitting in a room where they had a TV and all the monks and the lady I was working with were all in the room, and they were yelling and screaming at the TV for the World Cup. They are so competitive. And so based on that, when I was at the temple, I was actually working with kids from 8 to about 16. And so something came up about sport, and I can't remember what started it, but I actually got them down on the floor doing arm wrestling, and I matched them up sort of size-wise. And the younger ones and the older ones, they just loved it. They just had the best fun. I was there to teach them English. So goodness knows how that worked into the schedule, and it did. And, you know, they don't do any really physical work. So, you know, it took like 5 of them that I could hold them down, you know, with the arm wrestle. But they just do. They are competitive. So it just throws this whole new light on looking at monks and how they're just human beings, that they just live differently to us, you know?
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. I did love and enjoy teaching them. It was very good. So, yeah, and I think it's good for them to be competitive anyway, just because it gives them that drive, doesn't it? I mean, that's what...
It's human nature.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the adrenaline going.
Yeah.
That's it. It keeps pushing. What are the plans for EPA? Like, you've done so much in such a short space of time when you consider it. Where do you see it going? How do you see it growing? Is there enough knowledge out there in the general public that you even exist?
Look, that's probably a no. One thing we're not very good at is marketing ourselves. my big plan is to have, we have currently monthly clinics in Victoria and 6 a year in the other states. My big plan is to have monthly clinics in every state. We're just branching out this year into regional Victoria and South Australia. So we're running 3 regional clinics in those states. I'm hoping that will expand as well. So I think just more people, more clinics, more bums in seats, more people with access to what we do. Because, we've got in Victoria, the Victorian clinic here, we have athletes that come down from Wagga, from Bairnsdale, from Hamilton, from they come for 3 or 4 hours drive just to come for a 2-day weekend. And I'd like to make that easier for people. So, being able to expand into regional Victoria, regional South Australia, well, regional everywhere really, and just be able to offer what we do to more people.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And I had no idea, then I don't have that many horsey friends, and, Mary Jane, who you know,
Yes.
And is probably the most horsey person I know at this point in my life.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. Do you see the 2-day things, is that giving them enough time, or do you find that at some point it might expand out to maybe 3 days?
No, I think for so many of them, fatigue management is a really big thing. So we already pack a lot into a small, like a 2-day window. Some of them struggle with that as it is, so they might come for 1 day and only select the services that they want to participate in. No, I'm pretty happy with the 2-day format. I think that works quite well. It gives them enough of a challenge without then sort of fatiguing them too much that they can't function for the next week.
No, that's it. It's because that's always going to be a struggle, even for able-bodied people.
Yeah.
Really.
But the only other development is, as you alluded to, actually creating a bigger pool of coaches who have experience working with para-athletes. So we're doing a little bit at the moment on designing a connected coaches program, so that at each of the clinics, instead of just sort of knocking off at 5 o'clock, we'll actually, after 5, we'll run a couple of hours of coach education and volunteer education. I think trying to integrate the para judges into able-bodied judges training, same putting a little section of how to coach para athletes into the able-bodied coaching education. Just more integration of the whole thing. It shouldn't be that separate. It needs to be much more integrated and inclusive.
Yeah. And what's happening then on a more global scale? Are there other people like EPA overseas or doing similar things?
I don't really know. I think we're fairly unique. I think, yeah, certainly British dressage, the Americans, they're at high performance level. They're doing a lot. They've got a really, really well structured system, but I'm not sure about the pathways piece. I think we're fairly unique.
Yeah, well, which is a good thing, isn't it?
Oh, look, it is for sure. There we go. We can be Equine Pathways Global.
Well, look, hey, you're putting it out there, aren't you? It's
that's right.
Thing, and I sort of suspect that the sort of love that the animals would be giving these people, based even on what you've said so far, a lot of them probably don't even get that most of the time.
No.
Depending on where they're coming from. So, I feel there's that really nice connection of energy between the animals and the people, and then you've got to be special, I think, to be able to work in that field. To be honest, like if you think about it, you're working with way more challenges than the average horse rider would be working with.
Yeah.
Be working with, I know from some family members that were severely, for want of a better term, handicapped when they were adopted. My auntie and my uncle adopted a girl and a boy. And, you know, with Nathan, they just said, hey, he's never going to walk again. Well, I can tell you the amount of love that my auntie and uncle put into those kids was phenomenal, on top of the fact that they had 5 girls anyway. So, you know, it really does come back to the amount of effort put in and the amount of love you've just got to give in an unconditional way is really what makes it even more special.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing for me as a coach, like I can teach an able-bodied athlete without really thinking about it. It's a little bit remote control, and I've done it for so long. Teaching an athlete with a disability is very different. It's very individual. You have to think outside the box a little bit. You have to, you know, redesign what you would normally say, how you would normally explain something, or how that physicality impacts what the horse is actually doing. You know, normally you would put, if a horse, you needed to step to the right, you would apply your left leg. And if the athlete doesn't have a left leg, then you can't just say, well, you know, make it step to the right. You've got to come up with another way of doing it. So as a coach, I find it really intriguing and really exciting. And also, I've got that comment so many times from all our other allied health professionals as well. Like a lot of them, you know, physios that work with able-bodied athletes versus para-athletes, there's always that extra engagement with the para-athletes because it's a challenge. So they're having to think outside the box.
Yeah, which I think is a good thing. I think it's a very good thing.
Definitely.
So in that space, we'll add some information to the end of the video for people to see where they can log on. But if people want to get involved, whether it's on an athlete sort of way, or whether it's just volunteering or learning, what's the pathway for them?
The best way is actually just ring me. At this point, that's the marketing division right there. Just give me a call. They can put an email into I think there's an email expression of interest form on our website.
I think I saw that previously.
Yeah, I've got I don't know if I can share screen. I've got a QR code that I can pop up. That takes them to the Donate Now page. So obviously money is always very gratefully accepted, but volunteer hours is great too. If they're people who are horsey, that's wonderful. If they're not, there's a really important role to just sit and talk to people, because as I said, a lot of these participants, they don't see people from one week to the next, and this becomes a real social connection for them. So if somebody, you know, just wants to has some spare volunteer hours, just come and have a coffee. You know, that we'll quite often have 30 or 40 people in the building, and we'll always have lunch together, and everyone sits and shares lunch. And quite often, just having someone to chat to is a really big part of the experience for those people. So for the athletes, so yeah, volunteers, anything like that would be fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
and if they happen to have horses that they think would fit the bill, happy to talk about those as well.
Right. So yeah, there's a big avenue or scope for people to really get involved in that space if they want.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
And like any charity, I mean, they're going to survive on the beautiful people that actually come in and volunteer or work or do whatever they've got to do. So you know, I can see why that's an important role in what's going on. So it's good. Now, Shirley, did you have any questions that you would like to fire across?
No, really. So much has been explained. Everything in my head is already explained, but I feel like I need to say that it's opened up such, you know, from being horse involved and everything, it opened up a whole other side to you that is the passion for the people as well, and the ability to do what you're doing is amazing. And I think anybody that enters be very passionate. They have to have that activated because, look, we had horses from the track that went out to this sort of thing years ago too, and stuff like that. So I know a little bit about it. But, you know, from what you're saying now, I don't think anybody, like I'm sitting here thinking it's igniting in me how actually so big and so amazing that it is, because it is so multi-leveled. And you have to be understanding. You have to be understanding horse. You're the bridge between the horse and the human.
Yep.
The aspects of your brain, your intuition, you know, your horse whisperers, your people whisperers as well.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize I liked people as much as I do, but it turns out I do.
That generally helps.
Excellent. So that's our QR code. That takes us to the Donate Now page, which it's always awkward asking for money, but we are a charity and we do run because of the generosity of our donors. So that's one way people can get involved. The other way, as you said before, is just give me a call if you've got spare time, whatever state you're in, to just come and see what we do. I love showing people what we do, and without exception, when people walk into the building and see what's happening, there's always tears, always. I've not had a single clinic yet where somebody hasn't been in happy tears.
Oh, love it.
I'd love to welcome people to come along.
So with that said, we'll put all that information in. The other part about this too is the website is very good, and it's just equinepathways.org.au. So people can jump on there, a lot of information. Julia, good luck with everything. You're an amazing person, doing some amazing things for a lot of people, and I admire and take my hat off to you for that. I'd like to thank you for joining Supernal on this chat, and people can look out for issue number 53, where you'll see this video linked. You'll see a bit more of a story from Julia and some imagery that we need. So look out for that. That'll be coming out in the first week of March 2025. Shirley, thank you very much for joining us again with our Supernal interviews. So we'll just wrap it up. supernalmagazineaustralia.com.au, and you can get the latest issue free. You can pay a small fee and you can get access to all the back issues, and there's our videos and our podcasts and all that sort of stuff, all at a very, very reasonable rate. So we love people to subscribe and join Supernal. And again, Julia, thank you very much for your time.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for hosting.